I'll just start off with my opinion. The resistance phase is just too short. Changes to the resistance phase have been talked about since the game was in beta, with one similar complaint always brought up: the length of the resistance phase and different game modes as well, which we'll get into. I've been a longtime member of the Foxhole community, and I'll add that this is the most burnout I've ever seen the community since the French invasion. I mean, heck, we just had Helping Hans make a similar video just the other week. After several wars being 25 plus days of brutal war, the community is only given a few hours before the next war even begins, it seems like. Realistically, of course, it's about 1 to 3 days. In my opinion, this should change because the 1 to 3 days is just far too little time. Wars this long cause burnout on a large scale, and resistance mode should be just as long enough to allow a majority of players to recover from the burnout. But I know that there's a group of players out there that don't think the resistance phase should be any longer at all, which I respect. As far as I'm concerned, from what I see and what I read, players are pretty dissatisfied with the current state of the resistance phase. And of course, throughout this video, if at any time you think that I'm wrong, please feel free to let me know in the comments. All I ask is that you leave some constructive feedback so that I can respond and we can have a discussion about it. Out of the 800 hours that I have in this game, I've probably spent less than 5 minutes in the resistance phase. During this video, I want to talk about the resistance phase and its purpose, solutions to make the resistance phase better, and finally, game burnout and solutions to help with game burnout. The simple way to explain resistance phase to those that may not play Foxhole is that it's basically a 1 to 3 day break where the devs have a smaller map open to everyone and everyone just logs on to punch each other in a pit. When resistance phase originally came out, it played a role of letting factions stash some supplies for their next campaign. It has since lost that feature, and seemingly resistance phase plays no role outside of being a playground for memes and Fight Club. I personally see it as a time of relaxed tensions between the factions because no one really cares about winning anymore, which is great. But again, put simply, it's a phase between the wars. Nothing you capture or build or do matters. It will all just get reset when the war starts again in a day or two. Usually during this time, the devs will post the start dates on the Discord for the next war. They will also post the war's starting conditions and layouts for the resources as well just a few hours before the actual war starts. The posting of the war conditions just a few hours before the war starts is something most people hate, but we won't get into that today, and I'll make another video about it another time. Next, I want to discuss my opinion on why resistance phase should be longer and some opinions on why it should stay the same or maybe even be shorter. You may not understand the work the game sometimes forces players to go through, but making an extended resistance phase will have more positives than negatives, I believe. Simply put, we need time to reset, and then we will start a new war refreshed with new spirits. This just might be my own personal rant, but I just feel like ending a war and then boom, 2 days later the next one starts gets a bit exhausting. This entire rant could just be from the logi and building side, honestly. I wouldn't be surprised if infantry players didn't feel this way at all. To them, it's like the next Call of Duty match just started. I personally think a longer break between wars would allow for users to avoid burnout and allow for more goofy shenanigans to occur during resistance phase. I think currently it's causing a lot of players to get burnt out because the resistance phase is so short. I know there's a lot of facility makers out there and bunker base makers out there that feel like they need to start at the beginning of the war or they're already behind, and that can be a lot of pressure. The issue is really that optimal strategies for building and logistics leaves almost no room for downtime. The game punishes logistics players and builders quite often. You can't have idle factories or unmanned scrap fields or oil fields or coal fields. These types of productions need to be working around the clock constantly. And to add on to that, sometimes we have the pressure of teching into certain items faster than the other faction does. Nothing in the game for quite a while has been done to make this strain a little bit better. The game has essentially kind of remained the same for quite some time. Or if anything, facilities has made more work for us. And I'm saying this for both sides. Both Colonial and Warden players need to have time to reset. And again, especially our Logi and Builder players. Sometimes a lot of them are just running straight on fumes. And honestly, rightfully so, with the enormous distance that they had to travel in order to deliver those supplies to the front, or the hours and hours that they spent building that huge defensive bunker base. Something that also keeps players chugging along towards burnout phase is FOMO. FOMO is that acronym of fear of missing out. Foxhole is simply a team game where we prefer to have fun with our mates and not miss out on cool moments. I think we all know those players that are extremely dedicated to Foxhole, and I know this rant about resistance phase being a little bit longer might only be for a few players. honestly, the majority of the community might not care that resistance phase is so short, which I'm okay with accepting. I am just really looking out for those players that put their whole heart and effort into every single war. So having 5 to 6 days just to enjoy Fight Club a little bit longer, or try out some tech, or to celebrate the last war ending would be really nice. I think it would be really cool to see a clan throw a celebration party somewhere on the map, kind of like what we do with Fight Club. You could have races and music. I think it would just be a really fun experience to do in between wars. Now, the argument that I've seen pretty often is that no one is forcing you to play Foxhole, which is correct. But taking breaks becomes an issue when large clans or regiments are doing it at the same time because they all want to play as a group. This is where we run into situations like low population. I've heard other opinions that resistance mode just needs to be done away with. That resistance mode is making it harder for new players to join the game. We're essentially telling new players, yeah, come back in 2 or 3 days when the next war starts. I think this fear of new players being driven away is kind of a myth, but it's also a fact that resistance phase is really only uninteresting to veteran players who actually perceive it as meaningless. I've seen new players join resistance phase and actually love it. Honestly, most new players won't even realize the resistance phase is happening, let alone most of them won't even care when they do find out it's happening. The game will still be new and fun for them. There's also arguments that the devs turning off their game for a week would be like committing product suicide. I mean, why else does your game exist but to be played, correct? As it stands right now, resistance phase is the perfect example of allowing players to take a break while still allowing players to play the game. So from my opinion, stating that the longer resistance phase means people can't play just kind of makes no sense to me at all, actually. But again, I would love to have a discussion about it in the comments below. Now, here are some of my solutions to make the resistance phase at least a little bit more entertaining. Because I'm on the side that wants to make the resistance phase longer, I should have solutions to make the resistance phase more entertaining. So that's what we're going to go over next. A lot of ideas that I see the most is there just needs to be different modes within resistance mode, like different game types, like the zombie mode, or maybe a capture the flag, or maybe like a king of the hill, or maybe something with like collecting resources. Just something a little bit more relaxed and social might help with burnout a little bit more and also help build community in the game. I think it would be really cool if they brought that zombie mode back to resistance mode, but both factions became one team, and maybe it's like the amount of zombies is like the amount of people that were killed in the previous war. You could add some lore to it if you wanted. Or a really cool one I thought of as well is you could do like a 7-day free-for-all. You spawn in a random location on the map with a random kit. It keeps track of your kills, so somebody with the most kills at the end of the 7 days wins. Maybe you could even drop in like Player Unknown and like other battle royale games or something like that. And speaking of battle royale games, maybe you could have a battle royale type thing in Foxhole as well in one hex. I've seen a lot of people talk that they want skirmish back. Skirmish could be really fun as long as you don't have anything that affects the future wars, in my opinion. So I would definitely be fine if they brought it back, again, as long as there was nothing affected for the next war. Maybe there could be like a string of mini games that you could play in different hexes, like tank battles or arty fights or small infantry squad fighting. Maybe we could just have a free-for-all in one of the major cities. I have seen people mention that they think the resistance phase needs to be more of like a prep phase, where those 1 to 3 days of quote-unquote break would actually be for building bunker bases and building up supplies. I personally think that would mess up the early game, but I also think that this is an idea that just needs to be fleshed out a little bit more, and that there might be something there. Let me know what you think about that in the comment. I think overall resistance phase just needs to be looked at again. Find some way to replace it with something a little bit more fun so that we can extend resistance phase to be a little bit longer, and so that it gives us hardcore players at least a little bit more of a break. Again, I understand for the casual players out there that this all might not matter at all, but what do you think of some of these ideas? Would any of them work for resistance phase? Are there any games or ideas that you had that we should do during resistance phase? Let me know in the comments. Now, even with these solutions, and even if we were to get a longer resistance phase, burnout affects us all and affects us differently. I think it's important during this video that we briefly talk about gaming burnout. Burnout is a negative state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion, normally caused by excess stress and inability to cope with it. Sometimes during wars, it can feel like you're just going through the motions or you're just on autopilot. This can be a sign of burnout. Maybe you used to be more motivated to go to the front line or start new facility projects. Maybe in previous wars you built base after base. Maybe you're just getting to that threshold where you've put too many hours into the game, where small things happen that stress you out and get on your nerves, or maybe a new player does something they're not supposed to and you yell at them. This could definitely be a sign of burnout. I feel like we've all seen it in gaming. The person that's not able to control their emotions, gets moody and irritable. I mean, we've even seen this with a few well-known streamers, and where are they at right now? Self-care is something you should focus on. on. Maybe try not to stay up during those late hours to finish a logi task or finish a facility, or to keep pushing that relic base. You need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself first. I know we talked earlier about FOMO and the fear of missing out, but you need to be able to recognize when your health should come before the game. I mean, nowadays in games, our reward centers in our brain are being hijacked all the time. I think we're actually pretty lucky with Foxhole that we don't have like season battle passes or loot boxes or anything along those lines. I think the equivalent of what Foxhole has to that is we just want to be a part of almost every second of each war when we do play. I know I have had wars in the past where I wasn't able to start until like day 10 in the war because I was so busy with real life, and then when I did start at day 10, I didn't feel like I was actually part of the war. So I actually sat that one out a little bit more than I did others. For some of us, when you do start at the beginning of the war, you want to see it to the end. And again, sometimes we're not recognizing maybe how much time we've put into each war and how we should be balancing some of that time with relaxation as well. Now, don't get me wrong, there's ways to relax in the game as well. This is a very social game with proximity chat. I know Logi players that like to mix it up and just go to the front lines for fun and shoot around. They don't care about the meta. They just like to go pew pew. And I know frontline players that get sick of frontline will come back to the back line and just hit their heads against group. So if these are things that make you feel rejuvenated while playing the game, that's great. But if they even make you more stressed or irritable, then it's probably time to put Foxhole down just for a little bit. It's no big secret that something that gives you massive pleasure from the start will ultimately give you less pleasure over time. Our dopamine response systems aren't being triggered as often as they used to, and other sciencey things that go on in your brain. I'm not going to get into it. There's a bunch of other health videos that you can watch that'll be more specific, but you get the gist. Luckily in Foxhole, there's a lot of different roles you can play within the game. So again, if you do want to continue playing Foxhole but don't want to be burnt out, just go and learn a new role. You could even make specific challenges for yourself or set specific goals. One thing physically that I think that'll help you a lot is making sure that you stay hydrated and stretch a lot during your gaming sessions. Another thing that could help with burnout is just getting outside of your comfort zone and talk to more people in game. Maybe join groups that you normally don't play with. Making new friends can definitely be hard. Believe it or not, I'm a huge introvert and making friends is really difficult for me. It takes a lot of energy. Sometimes you just need to force yourself to do it, and if it's just not that fun, you can just always leave. And as I've mentioned before, ultimately sometimes the best remedy of burnout is just to take a step back. And I mean, I want to say this in the nicest way possible, but maybe just go touch some grass. Heck, if it's really nice where you live right now, maybe go lay in the grass for a while. I bet your body will feel 10 times better. Overall, just make sure to take proper breaks. That's been my brief public service announcement on gamer burnout. I think the main problem for Foxhole is that the sense of fulfillment for many people in this game is the victory at the end. These wars just keep getting longer and longer, and they're getting a little bit more exhausting as well. And it's hard to step away from a war that's just ended feeling all you've done for 4 weeks is nothing now. I think you just don't get to taste that victory for very long. And again, I just think the wars lasting this long doesn't really help with that issue. And I know everyone can set their own schedules. If someone's feeling burnt out, then that's on them to take some time away from the game. It doesn't mean that thousands of other players should lose access to the game that they enjoy playing. People saying just to take a break, you're not wrong. If you're feeling burnt out, you absolutely should be taking a break. Nobody would think any less of you for it. But there are a couple issues with that mentality as well. First, we know that people won't take a break. Logi players and builders sometimes feel a certain obligation to the community. And secondly, I know that's our fault as a longtime builder and Logi guy. I know a lot of Logi guys and a lot of builders are exhausted right now. And if we were all to do like a Logi strike or something and all take a break at the same time, then we would have a lot more shorter wars. War 30, for an example, we saw a huge logistics overhaul and a change to the map. Because of this, the war lasted much longer, which we saw utter exhaustion from Logi players and builders. And because of that, War 30 was followed by a 3-day war and 2 6-day wars. 3 wars that went on in the span of 2 weeks. Now that burnout was real, and it led to some very unfun times for everyone. And of course, as a community, I think we're doing a great job right now of staying away from that type of mentality, but it could be looming right around the corner. I really do love taking parts of this game that revolve around the psychology of the players on an individual level, all the way up to the group dynamics and how this affects morale and how it ultimately affects each war. It's interesting to see how it actually plays a role in each of these wars as well. We've offered solutions to these problems multiple times, but nothing ever really gets done. Having the resistance phase last a bit longer or changing the way it's played is merely a simple request, as it allows possibly more days for preparation, better assessment on the available population for the next war, and a means for logistics and building players to take some time off before the next war starts. But instead, we just continue to go straight into the next war. No time to prepare strategies, no time to see who's available, no time to plan accordingly to the map layout, and no rest for previous Logi or Builder players. Next war just starts instantly and people just wonder why the resistance phase even exists to begin with. And I want to emphasize as much as possible that I know this might be just a minority of players that think this. Most casual players might think the opposite of me and want, again, no resistance phase at all and for the next war to just begin after the last one ends. Again, you can certainly let me know in the comments with some constructive feedback and constructive discussion. I know I've said this in the past that every war counts, but I think at this point I'd be fine with, as a community, having a definite break war or something with, like, every odd war is a quote-unquote break war and every even war is the serious one, just so we can at least take quote-unquote breaks at the same time and not have low pops happen on certain sides of every war, because right now we're constantly having different clans and regiments and groups take breaks at different times. Maybe we don't leave this up to the devs. Maybe all major clans join a unified Discord where we can all say if we're taking breaks or not. I know people don't like third-party programs being involved, but it still might be a good way to see when big groups are taking breaks from wars. All I'm saying, and I know not everyone will agree, but just give us some time to recover, reflect, plan, and to create new enthusiasm for each new war. Or just have more relic wars, right? I would actually love to see the wars start on Friday afternoons or sometime around the weekend to have more start time hype and maybe even more people playing. And I think it would be at least an easy thing to try. What are your thoughts on that? Overall, I'm not wanting to take away playtime from the majority of players if they want shorter resistance phases or no resistance phases at all. I just genuinely think that longer resistance phases of 4 to 6 days would make future wars more meaningful. And I would love to hear all your thoughts on this. Of course, if you think I'm wrong, tell me with constructive feedback in the comments why I'm wrong. I'd just love to hear more discussion about this. As always, thank you all so much for your support and watching and being open to having these discussions. Make sure to subscribe for more Foxhole content. Join our Discord community in the description below. Make sure to give yourself breaks and stay hydrated. Cheers.